I was immediately shocked when I heard that Dying Light was coming to Nintendo Switch, more in the fact that it was a native port and not another cloud port like Kingdom Hearts and Hitman 3. Back when it was originally released on the base PS4 and Xbox One, Dying Light didn't run too great on them, struggling on the Xbox One and being what felt like just barely playable on the PS4. It's with that said that Dying Light joins the ranks of miracle Nintendo Switch ports that not only run on the Switch, but it runs well despite the bar set with prior, more powerful consoles. We play as undercover agent Kyle Crane, who begins his adventure by airdropping into Haran on an intel mission. Haran is the home of a major outbreak causing a zombie-like infection to spread across the territory. Unfortunately for Kyle, he quickly gets in trouble as he gets bit by one of the infected. Luckily, he's rescued by a survivor group that helps tend to his wounds, but also immediately puts him in the dead center of a faction war between those looking to cure the disease and those just trying to make a profit off it. While I didn't think that highly of the main campaign writing, like CD Projekt's Red Cyberpunk 2077, I found myself more encapsulated by the world design and the side stories living inside of it, and getting to know the people living in this devastating world was a lot more interesting than fetch questing for the main characters over and over again. It doesn't help that once you begin to reach the second half of the story, the mainline becomes quite predictable. Nevertheless, as a backdrop to the much more appealing open world, it's serviceable. Diving into the zombie-infested world of Haran isn't as devastating as it sounds, but rather it feels like speedrunning through a parkour maze filled with obstacles all over the place. It's a fun, entertaining, and exciting world to explore as you activate traps to evade zombies and leap from rooftop to rooftop. It's a joyride, but it takes time to get there. The early hours of Dying Light will have you running across the open world, completing fetch quests and favors for many of the NPCs at the survivor camp. Along the way, you'll begin to build up your arsenal and skill set, finding pipes and swords to melee attack zombies, scavenging for materials to craft your first aid kits, and perhaps some fireworks as a zombie distraction. Fighting zombies, surviving the night, and much more will earn you XP that racks up skill points for the 3 skill branches. You can invest these points toward earning new buffs for Kyle, or new skills that should make traversing the environment and surviving a much more enjoyable experience. Once you get over that introduction hill, Dying Light really begins to open itself up and it becomes a blast to navigate. Suddenly I'm racing across the open world, running away from buffed up zombies as I vault from a smaller one and slide under a fence. The combat doesn't really reach that same level of excitement as the platforming does, unfortunately. You do end up unlocking more guns in the later game, but mechanically their rate of fire is quite slow, and it feels more like a tactile shooter simulator than a more traditional first-person shooter. While it didn't stain my experience, it's good to level your expectations for what type of zombie shooter this game is. Part of what makes it so unique though is the day and night cycle that dynamically changes while you play. While you earn more XP bonuses by playing at night, the zombies also become more hostile, making the trade-off a risky experience. The overall 35-hour campaign, which can be played online with friends or with strangers depending on your settings, was a blast to play through. Ironically, more the side missions that expanded the world lore more than the main conflict. Dying Light is very much a game that treats its world as its main character, despite Kyle being the protagonist. When Dying Light was originally released on the PS4 and Xbox One, the game targeted a 30 FPS frame rate with a 1080p resolution on PS4 and about 1000p on Xbox One. Now on Nintendo Switch, I could never imagine how this would perform, but miraculously it runs fine. Nintendo Switch uses a reconstruction upscaling feature to target a 1080p in dock mode and 720p in portable mode. However, since this is being reconstructed, the base resolution is lower, but it still looks pretty good. It's not as sharp as other consoles, especially once the image is moving, and you can see a lot more of the artifacts, but it's not terrible, certainly not for Switch port standards. As with any miracle Nintendo Switch port though, some corners had to be cut in order to get this running, and Dying Light is no different. Comparing it to other console versions outside of the frame rate and the resolution differences, you'll notice a lot fewer alpha effects like fog and smoke. The resolution of shadows is significantly reduced. What I was more impressed to see was how well the character models held up despite their drawbacks. They're not as sharp as other versions, but they still look good. The target 30 FPS frame rate is met most of the time, with the occasional dips to about 27 frames per second, and even some spikes to 35 frames per second. Those spikes can get annoying, but luckily it seems developer Techland is planning to lock those frames in a future update for a more consistent performance. That gives me a lot more faith in the developer continuing to reiterate on improving the performance, although as is, Dying Light on Switch, especially on the OLED model, looks great. Performance metrics aside, Dying Light is impressive, especially now on a handheld. Having this open world filled with zombies in various buildings and towers that are essentially parkour platforms makes for one fun playground. Dying Light has an interesting soundtrack, especially for a video game revolving around zombies. It's not necessarily a scary soundtrack, but it's a much slower paced one with an ominous tone to it. The ambience makes for a rather uneasy feeling that I think really works in the nighttime sections of the game, when the zombies get a bit more violent. That's not the entire soundtrack though, as tracks like Destination make for a faster paced, almost action-like stealth sequence of being chased by an oncoming threat. It feels like these faster tracks are rarer in appearance, but leave a lasting impression when they do show up. As for actor performance, I thought most of the acting was great with the exception of the main character Kyle, who just doesn't really bring much emotion to their lines. Despite being in the middle of a faction war with a lot on the line to the point of some personal stakes later on, he really doesn't feel like he's fully present in the situation. Perhaps it's the tone of his voice during the more important moments, but there's definitely room for improvement there. Playing on Nintendo Switch, I was happy to see some HD rumble support for the title. I found it most noticeable in scenes where I was running across a building with metal panels of debris. I could feel the physical clink of the scrapped together roofs I was running on as I leapt from roof to roof. Dying Light on Nintendo Switch is an impressive port both in terms of being a great game and just from a technical standpoint. Dying Light continues to be a fun and entertaining zombie sandbox of exploration and parkouring. The story could be better, but from a gameplay standpoint, it continues to be an enjoyable time. Whether it's worth picking up for $50 on the Switch over the $30 more powerful platform is another question. Both include the DLC, and if you truly see yourself playing in portable mode, I think it's a worthwhile purchase, considering how viable of a choice it is while maintaining the quality of the game. However, if you solely plan on playing this in dock mode, I'd recommend picking it up on another platform first if you can. Those solely with a Nintendo Switch though need not fret over if this game is a good port. There's no question that it is.